Convention Committee of the Whole meeting. My name is CJ Mann, and I will be chairing today's meeting. The committee provides an opportunity to provide and have an in-depth conversation with the items contained on the agenda. Items referred to the committee are usually deemed inconsistent with the 2030 Comprehensive Plan. The committee discussion is less formal as compared to the Planning Commission meeting, and there are generally no time items or time limits for speakers. If any participants have any issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator. Today's moderator is Mr. Ira Mabel. I would ask for the commissioners to hold all questions until the discussion is concluded of all presentations and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. Our chairperson is out today. As I stated earlier, I'll be chairing today's meeting. Today we have two discussion items on our agenda. One item is a rezoning request and the other is a text change. I would like to also ask to alter the order of the agenda today to talk about the text change first. This text change was requested by the City of Raleigh Convention Center staff, and they have a conflict later on in the afternoon, so they have to reschedule. So we want to talk about TC 721 first as an agenda item instead of the rezoning request Z 6020. So that brings us to our first item, TC 721 DX digital signage. This is a city initiated request to modify the UDO. The text change would request and create a new category of signage known as the DX digital sign. I would like to ask for a staff presentation today from Mr. Keegan Mcdonald. I also understand that the Raleigh Convention Center staff is here today and would like to speak and comment on this case as well. That being Ms. Carrie Painter. Keegan, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I will go ahead and begin my presentation. As mentioned, Carrie Painter and I think a few other users have signed up to speak as well. So once it gets to that point of the presentation, I'll be happy to answer any questions before passing it off to them. So this text change is related to DX digital signage. Essentially, it would permit certain types of digital signage in the DX district for civic buildings or outdoor entertainment facilities that satisfy specific minimum seating criteria. Before going into the technical aspects of the text change itself, I wanted to provide the committee with a little bit of background as to why this is being brought forth. So the principal reason is the Raleigh Convention Center and the Performing Arts Complex, which collectively include also the Red Hat Amphitheater and the Duke Energy Performing Arts Center, have really been integral to the success and economic development of downtown. They're recognized as cultural assets, both for the region and the state, and draw thousands of visitors each year. The staff has identified a specific need related to marketing and promotion in the signage space. While these facilities are seen as state-of-the-art, they do lack the state-of-the-art signage that comparable facilities in competing markets have. And so this text is, sorry, Chairman?
I didn't say anything.
Oh, apologies. I thought I heard someone speak. So these specific signs are intended to really kind of raise the bar for these facilities such that they can compete, especially now as the pandemic begins to recede and the facilities are looking to kind of boost this sector as they make a comeback and the facilities are able to put on events again. And so this is really seen as a change that would be beneficial for these specific facilities. So there are, of course, multiple benefits associated with these types of digital signs. As mentioned earlier, the primary reason is as a marketing and promotional tool. As one can imagine, they're used to notify passersby, especially people who may live or work in the area of what is going on within the specific facilities. Sometimes it can be difficult unless you keep tabs on social media or website to understand what types of events may be going on. And relatedly, they are also seen as an equitable solution, especially for users of these facilities who may not have the financial means to pursue other marketing strategies to get the word out about their specific events. On a similar note, these types of signs can be used to spotlight the arrival of conferences and delegates, especially high-profile guests who may be coming to the city. This is a particular draw for those types of persons or organizations and is used as a criteria for selecting a city where to hold their convention or event. And an ancillary benefit of this type of signage is that the city envisions using these signs for messaging around public safety and emergency management. And as we'll get into, the text change is narrowly tailored such that it really would only apply to these specific city facilities. And I'll get into that a little bit more in the next few slides. So in a nutshell, the text change would amend section 7313 of the UDO, which pertains to special sign types. This includes other provisions related to crown signs, changeable copy signs, etc. So it would create a new subsection herein that would apply to these types of digital signs only within the DX district. And those would include signs that employ technologies such as LCD, LED, and projection to display content such as digital images, video, streaming, media, and information. The first in this bucket for digital signage is wall signs. And I have displayed here the exact text as it reads in the ordinance because I find that that would be helpful in just guiding the conversation and what actually is being proposed. So the first is wall signs. These are signs that are attached to the building, not exceeding 750 square feet in area per sign, to a civic building in the DX district where the civic building contains one or more places of public assembly, having a single room seating capacity of no less than 10,000, and no more than one digital sign shall be permitted on a building facade facing the same public street. So just to break this down, again, there would be one sign permitted on each building facade facing the public street. No individual wall sign could be greater than 750 square feet, and it would only apply to civic buildings in the DX district with that specific seating capacity. And at present, the only such facility is the Raleigh Convention Center. So again, this is very narrowly tailored language. Understanding the intent is to really apply it to these specific facilities. The next type of allowable sign would be a ground sign. So this has slightly different regulations. The first being its size, no more than 100 square feet. As a ground sign, it's erected on a supporting structure, mast, post, or pole no more than 20 feet in height. That language is pulled from the general ground sign section of the code. And again, it must be on a lot containing a civic building in the DX zoning district where the civic building contains one or more places of public assembly, having a single room seating capacity of no less than 2,100, or an outdoor sports or entertainment facility in the DX district having a seating capacity of no less than 5,000. So again, this is narrowly tailored. The only two facilities that meet these criteria that we are aware of after having taken stock of some other types of buildings in the downtown. The first being the Performing Arts Center, specifically Memorial Auditorium. That's where the 2,100 seating capacity comes from. The latter, the Outdoor Sports or Entertainment Facility, this applies only to Red Hat Amphitheater. And just to continue from the actual text, no more than one digital ground sign shall be permitted on a lot for each public street abutting the lot. So again, that's very similar to the regulation we proposed for wall signs. However, subject to the prior limitation, multiple signs may face the same public street, meaning you could potentially locate multiple signs. Let's say you had 4 streets abutting the lot, you could locate 2 of those signs on a single street, excuse me, but you would not be permitted more than 4 in total. And to make it clear, a ground sign is not attached, supported, or suspended to or from any building or structure. I wanted to provide a few images, and these were actually given to me from our staff at the convention center, just to show some other facilities in North Carolina that employ this type of signage. So that first image is from the Performing Arts Center, and this is going left to right. The first image is from the Performing Arts Center in Greensboro. The middle image is from the Night Theater in Charlotte. And that third image is from the Charlotte Convention Center. And just some additional examples of similar types of signage found throughout the country at various convention centers. So this is by no means kind of a unique type of marketing tool. It's fairly widespread, especially for markets such as Raleigh that are in size and do pull attendees and guests from all over. There are other allowances and restrictions contained within the text change, and I'll run through these for you. The first being that digital signage is, or this specific section of the code is intended to permit additional signage than what would otherwise be permitted by Article 7.3. So there are maximum signage regulations contained in 7.3, and those would apply for all other types of signs except for digital signage, which could be in addition there too. And so this would not hinder or limit other types of signs that the code would permit. These regulations are sort of meant to be self-contained, as they are contained within that special signage section of the code. For clarity purposes, we wanted to make it obvious to users of the code or readers of the code that these are not considered changeable copy signs. For those unfamiliar, those are signs with removable or movable letters, like the kinds that you see at churches or schools. And it's also not held to any minimum copy size restrictions in Article 7.3. Obviously, one of the benefits of digital signage is that you can display all types of images or text. And so limiting the copy size in this instance would really defeat some of the purpose of having a type of digital screen, which is meant to provide kind of ultimate flexibility in terms of what's displayed. The other provision we've included is that these digital signs shall not display any strobe lighting effects. This has never been considered, but we wanted to put this in for added protection and included a specific requirement related to the frequency of the light flashing, such that it would be held to that specific standard to not cause any type of strobe lighting effect. And relatedly, there are some allowances that we've included to not hold these digital signs to the standard illumination restrictions set forth in 7316G. And on the next slide, I've listed these out. So again, these types of digital signs would be exempt from these 3 standards. The first is that any light source from any illuminated sign or floodlight used to illuminate a sign must not be oriented so as to direct glare or excessive illumination onto streets or sidewalks in a manner that may distract or interfere with the vision of drivers, cyclists, or pedestrians as determined by the Development Services Director. Staff just identified this as a fairly broad measure that kind of could be misconstrued as it relates to these specific types of signs. Again, these will all be city-owned facilities. There's no intention that they will be visually offensive, distracting, hazardous in any way. In fact, in speaking with convention center staff, one of the identified potential vendors actually has technology that can kind of automate the brightness levels and some other aspects of the sign so as to avoid certain types of issues, especially at night if they're considered distracting. And then the last 2 are related to foot candles, and these are a intensity measurement. And again, just because of the nature of these signs, those could be difficult to meet and are probably fairly restrictive, considering they're not really these were not put in place to account for these types of video signs are more for kind of static signs that have a certain level of brightness, whereas a video screen could kind of change brightness if it's displaying some different type of media. And I did want to just go through quickly a few examples. These are renderings that were produced by one of the potential vendors just to show how the signs may appear in real life. Again, these are renderings and by no means the final design, but I wanted to show these to the committee so they could get a better sense of what is being proposed and how it would actually look in reality. So again, these would be those types of ground signs that you could see outside the facility. And then on the convention center, potential wall sign that would be permitted under this text change. And to note again, wall signs as written would only apply for the convention center, and the ground signs would be permitted both at the convention center, performing arts center, and the Red Hat Amphitheater. And here are just a few ground signs that could be employed at the Red Hat Amphitheater. So that concludes my presentation. I'm happy to try and answer any questions you may have related to the text change. As I mentioned earlier, we also have Carrie Painter, and she's invited, I believe, some other users of these facilities to speak with you all. But at this juncture, that's the end of my presentation. So please let me know if you have any questions, and if not, I can pass it off to Carrie.
Thanks, Keegan. I'm going to ask to hold our questions till after we hear from Carrie, and also after we hear from the public members who wish to speak. So Carrie, if you have anything to add to the presentation, we'd like to hear from you next.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you. I'm sorry our cameras aren't working. I'm not sure what happened, but I think you can hear me. Keegan did a great job at really outlining some of the challenges that we're experiencing in the venues. We're at a decidedly uncompetitive advantage with all our other venues by not having the ability to speak to who's in the buildings. When it comes to conventions, it's really important for meeting planners to be acknowledged. A welcome package, as they would call it, is one of their top few things that they look for when they choose a city. And while, yes, we offer them banners and they can put printed screens on our windows, it is so extraordinarily expensive. It's really difficult for a planner to take that on every time. And we have no way of saying welcome whomever it may be that's in town. The theaters have 649 events a year in the performing arts, the Duke Energy Performing Arts Center. I suspect that's a huge number to many of you, and you would not have any idea what probably 2/3 of those are, because we have no way of communicating that to our public, both the public who might be staying in a hotel at a convention, those who might just be visiting downtown, or those who work downtown. And it really makes advertising events very expensive. And so if we had a way to project who was in the building, we could sell future tickets for people, and we could make an equitable means to offer marketing to those groups who might not be able to afford to have a huge audience base built in, or to display the message to send it. The same comes true with Red Hat Amphitheater. We have somewhere upwards of 30 to 40 concerts a year. The city does benefit from ticket sales. It is a self-sustaining venue. It doesn't use tax dollars really to operate, and being able to sell tickets really helps us with our budget. And at this point, it's really tough to do that when somebody has to know to go look at a website to see what's on a calendar. It's a repeated question we hear. What are in these buildings? What's being performed? Why aren't they busy, when in fact they are, but they're just very large obstructionist type of buildings that makes it hard to see what's going on inside. So we really want to open the doors to the public, welcome people, and let them know the extraordinary offerings that are in all these venues and who is visiting. And these signs are a wonderful means to do it without invading into the downtown and being an eyesore or something that really disrupts everybody's travel and everyday life. So we really hope this text change achieves that for us. And thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. At this time, I believe we have some members from the public who wish to speak on this topic. I'd like for you all to, before you speak, state your name and also your address. And then, Ira, can you please unmute the first speaker so they can speak? And Ira, how many speakers do we have today? I'm sorry.
I have 3 signed up. I'm not aware of any particular order, so I'm going to start with Sandra DuBose.
Okay.
Hi there, can everyone hear me?
Yes, please.
Okay, wonderful. So thank you for this time. I don't want to reiterate everything that Kerry and Keegan said because I think they covered everything very, very clearly. But what I would like to add to the conversation is, I mean, when we're talking about signage, it's kind of, it doesn't really need a lot of explanation. But what I would like to say is that I really feel that it's important because this signage allows people in the community to feel welcome. As it is now, unless you're part of the arts community, especially as it relates to the Duke Energy Center for the Performing Arts, unless you are kind of in the know, maybe you are on the email list, maybe you frequent there, and you're already part of their community, you're the only one that knows what's going on in that building. And so, we're sitting directly across from an HBCU. We definitely want this venue to be something that is diverse and inclusive, that all people feel like, well, I'm not in the know, so I have no idea what's going on. I just see people, going in there having a good time, but do they really feel welcome? And I think that this signage definitely communicates, hey, come to use our facilities, come take part of what's happening inside of this building. And it lets everybody know that they are welcome. So that's why I'm really pushing and hoping that we can make this happen because it's going to have so many wonderful effects monetarily and just in terms of the culture and what we want to create within our city. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. DuBose. Can you please state your address for the record, please?
Oh, I live in Raleigh.
Okay. Okay, Ira, can you please present the next speaker?
Next, we'll go to Sandy McDonald.
Good afternoon. Sandy McDonald. I'm the president and CEO of the North Carolina Symphony. My address is 317 West Morgan Street in Raleigh. And I would just like to echo what my fellow arts presenter, Ms. DuBose, just stated, specifically about welcoming patrons, all patrons, into the Performing Arts Center. It is my life's work to introduce new participants to our art form. And while many of our longstanding patrons, of course, witnessed the building of Mamandi Concert Hall and Fletcher Opera Theater, there are many, many, many new members of our population who have not been welcomed into our halls, and frankly, don't know what's inside the building. So this will go a long way to building that bridge. Also, the concept of bringing the cultural arts from the inside out very much resonates with me and my colleagues across the country who have this type of signage at their facilities. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your comments. Ira,
Finally,
okay.
Yeah, finally we have Dennis Edwards.
Hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Great. I'm Dennis Edwards, located at 421 Fayetteville Street. I am the president and CEO of the Greater Raleigh Convention and Visitors Bureau. And we fully support the text change and the proposed digital signs at the Raleigh Convention Center, the Red Hat Amphitheater, as well as the Duke Energy Center for the Performing Arts. As Kerry stated, meeting planners and event organizers expect an acknowledgement that they are in Raleigh with welcome signs similar to the ones being proposed. Most other destinations have this capability. These proposed signs are highly visible and easy to spot. They will improve the overall experience for our attendees and visitors and reflects that there is activity downtown. More communication and information is always preferable and will help brand the entire complex. As we help downtown Raleigh and its venues to recover, we need to do everything we can, going above and beyond, to show that we value our guests by reaching out to them and making their visitor experience as easy and as efficient as possible. These signs will accomplish that. They will also help inform our businesses and residents when there is activity in downtown, who's here and who's performing. These signs will improve the overall visitor experience, which will help create happy customers and guests and ultimately repeat visitation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards. At this time, I'd like to open up the floor to the committee to see if we have any questions or comments about the case that we've just seen. Commissioner Bennett, I see your hand first.
Thank you, Chairman. I have just one question and one comment. Overall, I think this is a good text change. I'm not opposed to it. I used to work downtown in the BB&T building, kind of diagonally across from the convention center. And I can remember coming into work and seeing the big tour buses, and we would often wonder who's here, who's performing, and we would have to, do all sorts of research to find out who was here. So I think it's great to have some sort of signage so we know who's performing. My only question is around the exemption from the regulation about glare and intensity. That one concerned me a little bit because it seems like we would want to retain that exemption. I'm not quite sure I followed why it was being exempted from that particular regulation. I would think glare on drivers going by would be a concern.
Yes, this is Keegan, and I'll try and answer. I also may defer to Mr. York as he helped to draft the text change. I think there's just a belief that this could be utilized in a way, since it's written so broadly, there is potential concern that someone could claim these signs are in violation of that standard when in reality they're kind of performing their principal function. I understand though the concern of the committee, and I think there probably is an option to amend that section of the code, of course, if it's something that the committee so desires. I don't know if David has any additional information to add to that point. That was my understanding.
That's precisely the case. It's vague. There's no objective standards to it necessarily. I don't know to what extent that particular code provision has been employed. It may have been employed several times. I don't know. But because of the nature of these types of signs, the wording of that subsection 1 was of a concern. I believe Carrie reached out, excuse me, Carrie Painter reached out to one of the vendors she's dealing with, and they indicated that that would not be a problem, but because it's so vaguely worded, it's hard to qualify because you got to jump in the head of the development services director to know what they believe is excessive. So that was, there are several things in the sign ordinance that needs fixing that I'm working on a draft text change. Some of those vague guidelines and standards are part of it. And so I wanted to go ahead and avoid the argument with these DX digital signs.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner McIntosh.
And I don't have any problem with this proposal at all, but I'm just curious, do we know if other cities have any sort of quantitative restrictions on glare, or is this maybe a unique standard in Raleigh that doesn't have parallel standards in other cities?
I think David did some research on some cities. I think there are jurisdictions that have developed standards. However, they're fairly technical in nature. And given the kind of limited application here, we did not decide to go down that path. But of course, it's something that we could potentially research further. I think City of Los Angeles, for instance, has some very detailed measures about signage, given the number of billboards that exist there. As just one example. But I think, again, just with these being only employed on city facilities, kind of trusting the convention center to develop something that's appropriate for the context of the facilities.
Thank you.
And the standard itself is more dealing with exterior lighting to illuminate the sign itself. And in this case, the sign itself is the illumination. And so that was my concern. I think to the extent this provision may have been used or enforced in other parts of the city, my guess, and it's a guess, would be it had to do with the positioning of exterior lights pointed towards the sign itself to illuminate the sign, and whether those light sources used to illuminate the sign were flooding into traffic lanes.
Commissioner Rains, I saw your hand.
Thanks, Vice Chair Mann. Comment and a couple of questions. I echo Commissioner Bennett's comments. When I first read this, I was slightly concerned this type of signage would be potentially used to open the floodgates to other commercial uses in the downtown district. But the way it reads, it really restricts it to truly just 3 places. I do hope that the city maintains that restriction in the future for the downtown. Question on the height for the ground signs. There was 20 feet high limitation, and just wanted to ask staff about the development of that, and if they looked at other heights lower than that, and that just kind of why they chose the 20-foot high max. And then this allows the use for illuminated signs. Is there any description of the quality of material construction and design for these particular areas, so that we don't have just a metal pole with a light on it, so to speak? So if staff can address those 2 questions, thanks.
I would defer to Mr. York on the height requirement or the height provision.
Regarding the height provision, it was primarily to accommodate the desired signage at Red Hat. If you, I don't know, we don't have the presentation, but if you printed out the presentation or have access to the presentation, the last 2 pictures show a sign that crosses over one of the entrance gates to Red Hat Amphitheater. And so the height of 20 feet there was to accommodate a sign that went over the gate that patrons could walk under.
Okay, thanks.
Do you have any?
Relates to the material provision. I don't think I would have to comb over the sign regulations a little bit more closely, but I think generally, aside from how they are kind of constructed in their nature, whether it be banner sign or ground sign or wall sign, et cetera, that seems to be as far generally as the code gets into matters of aesthetics. I don't believe the code typically veers into specific material or design considerations, but David, feel free to correct me if I'm wrong in that assumption.
I don't recall, but can't swear that for freestanding signs I don't believe there's a materials list. It says the supports must be, but there could be. I'm trying to look real quickly. So let me check.
While Mr. York's doing that checking, do we have any other questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. I don't want to beat this to death, but I'm trying to think it through. So back to the glare and the intensity of the glare. I understand what you're saying, Mr. York. That makes sense. I think what I'm thinking about is we're seeing a lot of rezoning cases for more residential in these downtown urban areas that would be near Red Hat and the Convention Center and the Performing Arts Center. And, you know, a lot of the public comments that we hear when we listen to these cases is about light from parking decks and other types of lighting that would adversely affect the experience, I guess, of the residents. And so I'm just trying to make sure that I understand that that standard is very vague and would be hard to enforce. Is there something, some sort of standard that could be applied that would make the lighting somehow sensitive to the environment around it, especially as we're seeing more residential going up in those areas?
I'm sorry, Chair Bennett. Commissioner Bennett, that was directed at me, and I was looking at the sign ordinance. I apologize. We believe that the signs that this one particular vendor has indicated that they have a built-in, I guess, ambient light detection device that determines how bright it is, and the sign's brightness is adjusted for as much energy as much as light pollution. And so when it's darker outside, the light doesn't have to be as bright for it to be seen. When it's lighter outside, it's a little bit brighter, but you don't notice because the sky's brighter. And so there's those types of controls that are in the signs that are being considered by the convention center and performing arts centers. And so we have not incorporated that type of technology into the ordinance. I guess because right now the application of this text change has been narrowly tailored to really apply to these three venues. Once those signs come in and we can understand how they work and so forth, and I think you can set them automatically. You can set these ambient light sensors to automatically adjust. You can still override it and adjust it as well if it's not enough. Until we learn more about that technology, I was hesitant to put it in the text change, but we can add it to the text change once we have the signs and understand how they work and so forth. But I wasn't comfortable adding to the text change something that I didn't understand and something that I didn't know how it would be enforced.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner O'Haver.
Yeah, I have just a couple of things. First of all, I want to say that I support this totally. My wife is the chair of development for the North Carolina Theater Board. I think it would be a great opportunity to provide that communication that needs to be to the community. And I will give the vendor credit. They did a little bit of homework. I saw that Kinky Boots was on there, which was a great show. So if you didn't go see it, next time it comes around, go see it. It's a great show. But I agree with Commissioner Bennett, Commissioner McIntosh, Commissioner Raines. And some of y'all might remember, I can't remember if I chaired or sat on this committee about digital signage about 3 or 4 years ago. And this hubbub around the sign at Peace in Person, in the glare, in the safety, it was a 6-month-long process to talk about this. And so I understand Mr. York's concerns, but again, to my fellow commissioners' concerns, I think there needs to be something written in. I do have some concern about what this says to other folks who were doing digital signage 3 or 4 years ago and are now restricted. And we are very narrowly focusing this to allow certain signage in certain areas and not others. I, again, totally agree with it. I'm just, if those folks are paying attention to this who were raising hell 3 or 4 years ago, it might put a burr in their saddle. So I absolutely think that we need to put some guidelines around the glare and the lighting. Some of the concerns were like, how often can images change? The illumination, I think some of that stuff needs to be considered. I want to reiterate again, I support this 100%, but I think maybe we might need to just take a little bit more time, understand the history of where this digital signage has been with the city, and just consider some of those concerns. And then my last question, the 750 square feet and the 100 square feet, I guess for 750 square feet for the wall sign, 100 square feet for the ground sign, do we have an idea about what the average height of those things need to be to understand the size of them? Again, as we're talking about glare, again, Ms. Bennett's point about neighbors and folks driving down the street. I mean, this is what we heard a lot about 4 years ago when we were talking about digital signage. So I don't know if there's like an average height that, I know it's about car speed. If you're driving 35 miles an hour, the font size needs to be different than if you're driving 60 miles an hour. Like, I get it. But I'm just curious about if we have any idea about what those average heights are. And maybe it's not necessarily germane right now to this conversation, but I'm just curious about it.
Thank you, Commissioner Haber. Any other comments? So it sounds like we're hearing some concerns maybe about the illumination, and I know Commissioner Haber worked extensively a couple of years ago with digital signs and how often these signs can or need to be changed. The content on the signs need to change. So I'm wondering if we need to take some more time, or we can entertain a motion to get this out of the committee of the whole today. So I'm for whatever the flavor of the committee is for at this moment. Mr. York.
Yeah, just quickly to Commissioner Rain's question. The only thing I've been able to find thus far is in Chapter 7, where it deals with low, medium, and high profile ground signs. There's just a statement that says all ground sign braces or uprights shall be self-supporting structures permanently attached to concrete foundations in or upon the ground. There's no statement as to the material of the supporting standards. My understanding is, but I can be corrected easily. I don't know if Justin's on the call or not, but I believe when you have a freestanding sign, there is a building permit element to it, but I'm not sure. In addition to the sign permit.
Oh, Commissioner Miller, I can see you now.
Hello.
Hey.
See everyone. I wanted to just clarify with Mr. York, did you say that there is another text change that you're working on related to signage and digital signage that would apply to the rest of the signs throughout Raleigh?
It's not dealing directly with digital signage. It's sort of an overhaul of the sign ordinance to bring it concurrent with recent case law. And recent case law meaning case law that came down from the Supreme Court within the last 2 or 3 years. There's some things that still need cleaning up. And so
some of these other questions be addressed at that time, and in terms of clarifying what we mean by glare and
yeah, I mean, I would like to clear up that one provision anyway, to have it not so vague. And so we can, at that time, when we come up with some more objective standards to attach to that type of a requirement, we can look at making that applicable to DX digital signs if it's not done at this time.
okay. I shared several of the other commissioners' concerns about the language generally and about glare in residences across the street. But given the location of where these venues exist and what is across the street from them, which is largely other government buildings and one hotel, and given the fact that the entities behind that will be deciding what goes on those signs and how they appear will be government entities themselves, I'm prepared to give deference to what those government entities will do, particularly if the text change to clarify some of this other language is coming down the pike, and we could have that apply to this as well. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Elder, I think I saw your hand go up, and then Commissioner O'Hara will get to you.
Thank you. I just had a quick question about the content, I guess. Is there anything, I didn't see anything that speaks to whether or not this is restricted to, I think it was mentioned, emergency notification and event notification. Is there, but I think that didn't seem to be restrictive. It just seemed to be that was what the city envisions using this for. Is there anything to limit that, or I guess what is the process for what goes on the signage? Do we have any clarity around that?
Perhaps Carrie, if she's still on the line, could speak to what they envision for content. Looks like she's muted.
And I guess the concern is just, does this become a revenue producer at some point for the venues, a separate revenue producer with ad space, or is it primarily to promote the events taking place in them?
I'm sorry. Can you hear me now? Great. The theory is really primarily events. Our goal is not to sell sponsorship or advertisement. If it does say Kenny Chesney with Corona, that might be one thing, but we are certainly have no intention of selling any advertisement. But there are days like hurricane evacuation or weather warnings or an Amber Alert, or perhaps we had to evacuate the building for some reason or shut Red Hat down because of a storm, that we could relay those messages. Weather in the amphitheater is a common problem when we have to shut a show and try to get that message to people. Take cover, please proceed to the parking structure until further notice. So it's just a great conduit for those things where we don't have a place to do that now.
Thank you. Commissioner O'Hara.
Thank you, Commissioner Mann. A couple things. I'm happy to make a motion if Mr. York thinks he can bring something back to the full commission by the next time we see it. I'm not trying to stall this at all. I do think the glare and the lighting and and some of those things need to be tightened up. So I'm happy to make a motion to move it out if Mr. York thinks we can get this stuff sort of tightened up for the next full commission. I did just hear Ms. Painter say that, you know, the theory is that we're not going to do this. And so I do think that Commissioner Elder's concerns, I mean, again, I think there's just probably maybe some tweaking and tightening up that maybe this could do. I think my sense is, again, we're all getting deft at video meetings, but, you know, seems like everybody is in support of this. There's just a few things that we're concerned about that if we can just tighten up a little bit, we can get behind. And then my last question is, what about the digital sign at PNC? What does that fall under? Because that thing, you know, speaking of like materials and, you know, just sort of size and all of that, like what is that regulated by if we're just now sort of getting into this?
Mr. York.
Yeah, two things. First, the digital sign at the arena, my understanding is it's in the right of way. It's permitted in the right of way by NCDOT because it's an NCDOT road where the sign's located, and we do not regulate signs in the right of way. And so I think another example is the running marquee at Channel 11 Studios on Fable Street. That sign is in the right of way. You can't have that marquee anywhere else unless it's in the right of way without a change in the code. What I was saying to Commissioner Miller was there is another text change that I'm working on. It's nowhere near ready to present, where I would like to clear up the section on glare as well as some other issues in the sign ordinance. I did not mean to indicate I could have clean language to address glare at the next planning commission. I mean, it's possible, but I can't swear to it because I'll need to bring in some other lighting experts to come up with some viable, enforceable standards. And so I just don't know that that will happen in the next 30 days. I just wanted to clarify what I was referring to in response to Commissioner Miller's question was a whole new text change that's dealing with several aspects of the sign ordinance. I wasn't referring to necessarily being able to come back with some specific language with this. I mean, if that's what the commission wants, we will definitely work on it. I just wanted to make sure you knew I wasn't projecting that in my response to Commissioner Miller.
Commissioner Hamer, you ready to make a motion?
Well, I guess I just want to confirm with Mr. York. I mean, this is June 24th. I might have my dates off, but aren't we on vacation for July, the PC?
Yes, the planning commission, I believe the planning commission meets again on the 10th of August.
Okay, so does that give you enough time? I'm happy to vote this out if you feel like August 10th gives you enough time to bring that back to the full commission. If you're still skeptical of there, I feel like we might need to hold it, but I don't want to do that.
If that's what the commission wants, that's what we will attempt to do. That's all I can say. We'll do our best to try to come up with some objective standards to beef that up.
You're going on vacation too, Mr. York.
No, I don't have anything planned.
Yeah, okay. I'll defer to some of my other commission members.
Commissioner McIntosh, I saw your hand, and Commissioner Bennett will get to you.
Considering the ideas that Commissioner Miller brought up about this being limited to a few government facilities and not being near a lot of residential, I think I'd be comfortable voting for this. I do think that we've seen a lot of text changes come back and be modified, and so I also recognize the importance of getting stronger language in it. especially if this gets expanded at a future date.
Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. So it sounds like I may be in the minority, but that's kind of a familiar place for me. But my preference would be to hold it because I am generally in favor of this. And I don't want to not support it, but without some sort of language about that glare, I don't think I'm comfortable supporting it with the hope that it's going to be addressed in another text change later. I'd rather that other text change be done and then this could refer back to it. But it's not that I don't trust what Mr. York is saying. I trust that he's working on it and that it's coming, but we haven't seen it. I don't know what it's gonna say. And I do have concerns. We did see a rezoning by Red Hat that was residential. So I would just like to hold it and allow Mr. York and staff to see what they can come up with, and then we can take it from there rather than voting against it because I'm not comfortable with the language.
If I could make a suggestion, and this is without talking to Carrie, who's really representing the department who's requesting this, even though I don't like the language, we can modify the text change so that subsection 1 applies to digital. That way you have the language that applies to all other signs. I still have a concern over its wording, but since the sign's being used, it's narrowly tailored to limit it to these 3 venues. I don't anticipate a violation of subsection 1 is a risk. So if I'd rather have them, if that's the language that's in the code now and all the signs are held to, my recommendation would be that under section, the last part of section 1, and by section 1, I mean section 1 of the text change ordinance, it's actually number 6. DX signs are not subject to the illumination restrictions set forth in 7.3.16 G1, 2, and 3. We can scratch 1 out of that and say 2 and 3. If that would satisfy you, then we'll fix that language when we fix it for the entire city, if that's acceptable to the committee. I'd just throw that up as a suggestion.
Thank you, Mr. York. Commissioner O'Haver.
Yeah, in light of Ms. Bennett's comments, couple questions. Yeah, Mr. York, I think your suggestion is a good one, but I'm also curious again to be sensitive to her concerns. Even if we vote this out today, we don't need to just sort of pass it through when it goes to full PC. We can, I mean, I'm asking the question. I don't know the answer, quite frankly. I should. We can have discussion, and if we're not comfortable at that point, we can defer it at the full PC as well. Is that correct?
That's correct, Commissioner O'Haver. So if the committee votes out today, it's delivered to the next regular Planning Commission meeting, which is August 10. And the commission can continue to deliberate past that point up until the time deadline.
Okay, so again, we're virtual. I mean, I'm trying to be sensitive to Commissioner Bennett's concerns because I agree with them, and even Commissioner Miller's concerns. Like, I understand what's there now, but we know that they're building Civic Campus, and the city owns 14 properties in downtown that they're going to be disposing of. So we don't know what the future holds. I think it's an important part of what we're doing, again, supporting this 100%. So I would like to move it out knowing that there's additional discussion a month or more from now. And I know, Mr. York, you've got some work cut out for you, but if we don't get across the finish line at that point, then we can make a decision at that time to hold it or, vote on it. Okay. Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
Commissioner Bennett.
So I think Mr. York was just saying we would strike that exemption to the number 1, and then they wouldn't have to craft any additional language. Is that right, Mr. York?
Well, I still want to craft some additional language, but it would wait for the larger sign ordinance.
That's what, right.
We just wouldn't change the regulation, but we would have it apply to these DX digital signs.
So I would be comfortable with that. I mean, I would be comfortable with voting this to the PC with the direction to strike that 1 exemption. I think that was the change being proposed. I'm comfortable with it. I just wasn't comfortable with it going forward with that exemption there and not knowing what the new language would be. But if it's no longer has that exemption, the number 1, which was about the glare, then I'm fine with voting this out to the PC with that stipulation.
Commissioner Miller, did you have a question?
I was just going to clarify with Mr. York that was what he was saying, and if that's the case, then I support Commissioner Bennett in making that change as well. With respect to Commissioner Elder's comments about advertising, it could be also, I think they were including some language that maybe limits, obviously the sign is for advertising events, so we couldn't say it's a limitation on advertising. But maybe advertising for good companies, whatever, that are not related to the venue or the event taking place there. Signaling space for auto parts and realtors and that kind of stuff in the future.
Well, to be honest, I think the sign code already addresses that. So that would be considered off-premise advertising, and that's not permitted. So that they put, for example, signs, advertising McDonald's or Coca-Cola on there, unless they were serving that in the restaurant or in the facility itself. Does that make sense?
Oh, great. So there's already a limitation. So they couldn't sell those kind of sponsorships and.
That's correct.
For signage. Okay, great.
That's helpful to know. Thank you.
Thank you. So with all these comments, okay. Commissioner O'Hara.
Sorry, Travis. So if the convention said, if the Red Hat Amphitheater is selling Pabst Blue Ribbon, they can put a Pabst Blue Ribbon ad on the digital sign?
So that's a question, and it's somewhat nuanced. The way the sign code reads is you can advertise for products that essentially you're selling in your premises. I don't know that we've ever been faced with that type of question, and I'm not certain how we would answer that. But the general premise is that you can only use your sign to advertise for what's happening within your building or within your premises.
Well, I'll jump on Ms. Elder and Ms. Miller's comments then. I think when this comes back in August, I would probably have a little bit of concern about that, because again, I get it. These are city sites and we know the city's going to quote unquote do the right thing. But I'd probably like to see some additional language. I don't want to see PBR and Bojangles ads on the signs, I mean, which are two of my favorites, by the way, just saying. I mean, I have nothing against PBR or Bojangles, but I'm just saying, like.
Commissioner Latman.
The only thing is, I think it gets a little tricky. So if, let's say, Bojangles was running the event itself, You know, I think we're going to be anticipating that they would be on there as well. So I think it gets a little tricky trying to satisfy all parties in that.
Great point. That's why I would like to see in August an attempt to put some language around that. I mean, it is super tricky. So
I think to echo what Travis has indicated, what we have in the code right now is a distinction between on-premise and off-premise signs. And on-premise signs basically are drawing attention or advertising to activity conduct on the property in which the sign's located. Off-premise signs are referring to other properties or other activity or things that aren't on that property that the sign's located. The courts have endorsed that type of content regulation. Once we get beyond certain court endorsed content regulation, we're no longer content neutral, we're content based, and constitutional challenges to content based sign ordinances fail more times than not. And so I would advise against revising the code to say what could and could not be on the sign beyond what our sign ordinance already addresses. Those are some of the things we're trying to address with the text change, is to make it as content neutral as we can, except for where we have case law to endorse the content regulation. It's the First Amendment issue, and they're not easy questions. But I would advise against adding a provision that dealt with the content that could appear on the sign beyond what we already have in the code.
Commissioner Lamb.
I would agree with that. I think, you know, another thing I think of is sometimes you have a lot of companies that are sponsoring events. And so if they get listed, you wouldn't necessarily know if that's, you know, paid advertisement or not, but they are paying this to host the event. So I think it just gets too tricky. I'm in agreement that we don't limit that content.
Do we have any other comments or questions before we move on to the next case and try to move this out of the committee? Commissioner Haber.
I move to recommend approval of TC 721 with, and I don't know how to exactly say this, Mr. York, but including Ms. Bennett's striking of the item that we've discussed. I didn't write all those notes, so I don't know if that can be literally part of the motion. The rezoning request is reasonable in the public interest, supported by these specific policies in the comprehensive plan. Policy DT 3.8, downtown as a regional center. Policy DT 3.12, downtown as an arts and culture hub. Policy DT 3.13, downtown attractions and events. Policy DT 7.17, downtown wayfinding. And then again, with a request for some additional language at the full PC regarding glare, foot candles, lighting, etc.
Mr. York, will that suffice as a motion? Yes.
Yeah, the alteration is just striking subsection 1 from the part of section 7316G that would not apply to the DX digital signs.
So I would like to add striking subsection 1 as part of my motion.
We've got a motion by Commissioner Hayward. Do we have a second by Commissioner Miller? All in. Second. I don't think we need to do a show of hands. I think we need to call on Shanitha for a roll call on all in favor or against.
You can use it. You can You can just show your hands. This is not the formal recommendation. This is a committee recommendation back to the commission. When the commission, full commission votes, we'll want a roll call. But you can
Okay.
just do a show of hands.
All in favor in support of the motion submitted by Commissioner Haber, show of hands. In opposition? Motion passes 8-0. Moving on to our second and last case of today, Z6020 Lake Willow Road. This is a request to rezone approximately 7.5 acres of land from residential 4 and industrial mixed use to 3 stories, to commercial mixed use to 20 stories, urban limited conditional use. This request was referred to the committee of the whole as it has been deemed inconsistent with the comp plan and the future land use map. At this time, I would like to hear from a brief presentation from Ms. Hannah Reckow.
I wanted to just mention, I'm going to keep my video off because I have low bandwidth, but I'm still here as well.
Thank you, Commissioner Miller.
Right, as was mentioned, this is Z6020, request to rezone about 7.5 acres from R6 and IX3 to CX20 ULCU. You can see the zoning in the surrounding area is a mix of residential districts and mixed-use districts. Additional R6 residential neighborhood to the southwest, IX zoning along South Saunders Street, and then the South Saunders planned development is to the east. So this is the context aerial view of the site. This is south of downtown, just south of Western Boulevard, adjacent to Dorothea Dix Park, and fairly close to Mount Hope Cemetery as well. There's a mix of residential densities in the area, as well as some commercial and light industrial uses along the South Saunders corridor. A close-up of the site, you can see it is on either side of Hamel Drive, as well as properties fronting on Lake Wheeler Road, including, I believe it's 6 parcels that front on Lake Wheeler Road and currently have a detached house, and also properties on South Saunders Street. Here are some views of the site. The top view are from Lake Wheeler Road, and then one from Hamel Drive, and again, South Saunders Street. This is a conditional use request, and there are 2 proposed conditions. The first one pertains to the properties that are on fronting on Lake Wheeler Road, south of Hamel Drive. And it says that those shall have only residential or overnight lodging uses above the ground floor. And then the second condition prohibits several uses that are normally permitted in commercial mixed use on the whole site. So existing versus proposed zoning. The current zoning is a mix of residential district and a mixed use district. The request is for a mixed use district. The height is increasing from 3 stories up to 20 stories. So that's adding a significant amount of entitlement, especially for residential, but then also for commercial uses as well. So the site has 2 designations on the future land use map. Majority of the site is designated high density residential. This is a designation that envisions apartment and condo buildings, and any commercial uses only in a small amount ancillary to those residential uses. There's a small portion of one of the properties, one of the parcels that is designated regional mixed use. As the requested district, commercial mixed use would permit more of a mix of uses, more standalone commercial uses than are envisioned in high density residential. The request is inconsistent with the future land use map. So that the use part is one feature of this. Another aspect of the inconsistency is height. So the high density residential category envisions 5 to 12 stories, and that's context specific. This request is for 20 stories, and there's no other sort of step downs or changes in height next to the nearby three-story districts or residential areas. The site is close to the future Western BRT route. So there's a handful of urban form designations on the site, including a core transit area, the transit-oriented district, and then a Main Street designation along South Saunders Street. So these are all recommending an urban frontage which the request does include the urban limited frontage. So for that reason, it is consistent with the urban form map. So the request is inconsistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Again, that includes inconsistency with the future land use map designation and consistency with the urban form map designation. There are a number of policies that are relevant to this case. Here are the consistent policies that relate to compact development, its proximity to transit, the mix of uses on the site, the increase in housing entitlement, and then the frontage and urban form consistency. The site is also within the Southern Gateway small area plan, so there's area specific guidance that is applicable here, including 2 policies that are the request is consistent with. These 2 relate to having an urban approach to frontage specifically along South Saunders Street, and then redevelopment along Lake Wheeler Road. So there's increasing entitlement near the park property, the Dix Park property. You can look at the inconsistent policies next. Aside from future land use map inconsistency, there's also inconsistency with sort of reinforcing the urban pattern in the immediate area, some of the impacts that new commercial development would have on the surrounding context, and then sort of the lack of a transition in density or building height and the scale of those new commercial uses. And then also, again, this being a site where only ancillary retail is envisioned. And then there were 2 small area policies that were inconsistent. One having to do with encouraging reuse of the warehouses, and that's in reference to along South Saunders Street, and then sort of preserving the historic character that being reflected into future development. So that is the end of the sort of overview. Your deadline for action is August 23rd. And I'll note that the last meeting before that date of your regular scheduled planning commission meeting is August 10th. I can answer any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. At this time, I'd like to call an applicant, Mrs. Molly Stewart, to see if she has any questions, or not questions, but any comments or anything to add to the presentation that we just saw.
Thank you, commissioners, and thank you, Ms. Reckow. This is Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group. I do have with me some other team members in case we have questions for them today. We have Gabe Golaw and Hunter Defus of Atlas Stark, the applicant, as well as David Boyette of McAdams, our engineering firm, as well as Richard Adams of Kimley Horn. So you have in front of you the location, and obviously all by itself this is an exciting location. Kind of sitting there filling in a gap between a major development across South Saunders Street to the east that's coming down the road. Some major roadway projects along South Saunders, along Lake Wheeler. Hamel Drive will need to be significantly improved as well. It's not paved right now. We've got immediately to the north the Western Boulevard BRT route. Seems most likely at this point, clearly stops have not been placed yet, but this seems like a node where one is likely, and the early planning documents seem to indicate that as well. And of course, Dix Park with its adopted master plan. So a lot going on right here. And so we're here to kind of fit right into that, to bridge those gaps, to knit those things together. Next slide, please. Perfect. So I found this view very helpful. So kind of down the middle, coming down to the bottom of the screen here, that's Lake Wheeler Road with the park on the left. So we're looking toward downtown. The project is there outlined in yellow, so kind of showing how that fits in with a lot of the existing and then the proposed development that's coming into the area. So we can see that downtown is really expanding in this direction and knitting itself back together. Next slide, please. This is taken from the Dix Park Master Plan just to show how close that connection is. Those buildings that you see immediately across the street from Hamill Drive, which runs kind of through the center of this site, those are existing buildings. And although there isn't kind of a detailed plan for the area immediately across the street, it's very close by. So right there to the southwest is where a lot of activities will be taking place. We've had a lot of conversations in this process with various city departments, obviously with planning staff repeatedly, as well as transportation and parks. We have reached out to the Conservancy. We haven't heard back yet. So we have been trying to work with all of the various city goals for the area with respect to Lake Wheeler Road, with respect to the park. And the park in particular, I think we found a lot of excitement among park staff. And the reason for that is you know, the users of the park are going to need a lot of amenities. They're going to need lunch. They're going to need a place to park. And those are all things that can be better provided offsite rather than encumbering the park with, you know, sort of large surface parking lots, that kind of thing. And so that is a project we're excited to work with them on. Next slide, please. And this just shows, again, one of those early planning documents indicating the likelihood of a BRT station right there where South Saunders and Lake Wheeler come together. Next slide, please. And here we look at what the Southern Gateway Plan says very specifically about this area. And it talks about making an attractive and prominent edge to the park and using those higher densities to capture the value from the investment that we're making in the park and putting users close to the park. And I would say that all of those things would equally apply to the BRT investment. There's just so much happening in this area. It would certainly be nice to bring a lot of people to use those facilities. Next slide, please. And this is taken from the Equitable Development Around Transit study. And so what this shows is, you know, this is truly the heart of it all here in Raleigh. And so everything's coming together. It's within that kind of a cloud around the BRT area where there's talk of perhaps having an equity fund that gets generated from these sites and kind of helps to bring more types of housing to this area. So it really shows that, you know, this is the crossroads. Next slide, please. Again, this is from the Southern Gateway Area Plan study. This shows a general idea of what the concept was for this area. Now, I do want to point out the site itself, although it's within this area that was sketched out here in the plan, it actually doesn't, I wish I had a pointer here, but you can sort of see Hamill Drive that cuts all the way through from Lake Wheeler to South Saunders. And then the plan stops to the southwest of that. At the next street, and we actually don't go all the way to that street. We go about halfway to that street. There are more properties to that side. I want to go ahead a few slides now. Actually, I want to go ahead. Apologize for this. We've had some concerns come in just after I put these slides in, so I want to go ahead to those. So 1, 2, 3, 4. I think it's 5 slides. There, that's the one. So one thing I'd like to do to help put this project in context is point out how poised this neighborhood is for development. Today, this project kind of straddles a border between some existing warehouse and industrial space, as well as single-family housing. So you can actually see the site a little bit more clearly on this map because the project parcels along Hamill Drive there are in yellow, and then on the back side you have that dark purple that is not part of the site. So that's excluded. That's a separate area. So this map is taken from the Dix Edge study that is underway and not finalized yet. But this is, you know, city staff actually did a great job showing where the assemblages are, how many properties are held together with other properties in this area. That's one indicator of redevelopment coming. There are others. The housing stock in the area is a typical age is 70 or 80 years old. Those houses, they're nearing the end of their useful life. And in addition, even the homes that are sort of, you see the light yellow owns one property. Very many of those also owned in LLCs or owned by individuals living elsewhere. This is a trend that happens where you're about to see redevelopment. And as you saw from the crossroads map, that's what's happening here. This is kind of a first mover situation. And as you saw in the staff presentation, this area calls for a mix of more retail type uses as well as that high density residential. So I think we'll start to see that trend in this area. I want to address a few additional concerns that we heard and kind of how we're working to address them. I will note that we are working to address all of them, and we hope to be able to do that before coming back to the Planning Commission. Some specific responses that I have are that there was a concern that with additional height that isn't in keeping with the structures that are already there. It's a great point, and I'll just note that one, we would expect to see some changes in the area as well. So nothing in those plans indicates that one-story structures are intended going into the future. Also, the neighborhood transition requirements of the UDO do apply here. So the UDO is quite protective of this situation, this exact situation where you've got a mixed-use district butting up against an R district, and R6 is included in that. And where you have that, you've got a neighborhood transition. It comes with very generous setbacks for different kinds of things. The buildings, we're talking minimum 50 feet away from the property line. There are lots of restrictions here. It also has some height controls as you move toward the property line. So those are things built right into the code for this situation. And so that is something that applies here. Additionally, there's concern about displacement of existing business owners. I would like to point out there, so there are on this site along South Saunders, there are some existing warehouse and industrial buildings there. A few things going on over there. One, those properties have been acquired. They were acquired from business owners who sold their properties, who I understand by and large retired and benefited from the project. And so they have moved on. They're currently being rented out short-term from people who came in recently with that understanding that it's unclear what's happening here. I will also note that these properties have, there has been a change of use submitted to reuse those buildings as they are. So that is something already in process. In longer term, what I can say about that is I know that the goal is to preserve those buildings. We haven't been able to say more about that in our conditions just yet. We are just extremely early in the master plan phase. But in fact, the goal is not just to maintain a facade, something like that, but to truly maintain the buildings, to renovate them. This is something Atlas Stark has done before. I would like to actually go back if we could. 2 slides. Yeah, that's the one. So this is an Atlas Stark's site. And next slide, please. And so this is a type of redevelopment that they're familiar with and very happy with, and would actually love to replicate that in this area and to reuse those buildings. As I said, they're already making investments in those buildings and would love for that to be a long-term plan. It's not yet something that can be guaranteed. What we can do, and this is one of the conditions we'd like to come back with that we can say more about today, which is to come back with a condition similar to what you've seen in the past in the warehouse district. And in the warehouse district, you've seen a couple of times now, conditions saying that if a building is not fully preserved, then if a facade will be preserved, or possibly just sort of keeping with the general style to keep that historic character. And so that is a condition. We're going to look at those as models and come back with a condition like that. So just to kind of step back a little bit from where we are, like I said, we've gotten a lot of feedback and we are working to address that. Our plan is to immediately start working on those conditions, to bring back some additional conditions to address what we've heard. I will say, if it sounds like we're a little bit surprised, what we have found throughout this process, we did our outreach, not just to all the city staff departments that we mentioned, but also to the neighbors. We did our 2 neighborhood meetings, and in fact, at the second one, this project has been going on for some time. At the second one, we had that tenant notice. And we didn't get great attendance, but to the extent that we had people there, we have not heard opposition. We've heard support. And so we haven't had sort of specific comments like this. And so we are working to address those and would love to be able to come back. Obviously, as you know, putting together a site like this comes with some restrictions, and we would like to respectfully request that that we could come back on August 10th to the full commission with those conditions. And our goal would be to get those conditions out to you sooner, so that we can have those conversations and make any adjustments that are needed. But that is our goal. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Thank you.
Thank you, Molly. I believe we have one member of the public that's ready to speak on this case. Ira, can you please unmute the speaker, and speaker, please announce your name and your address before we get into the topic. Thank you.
We have Mr. Doug Johnston.
Hello, everybody. This is Douglas Johnston, 120 Forest Road, Raleigh, North Carolina. I'm very excited what I heard from Ms. Stewart. I'm a big believer in looking at all the assets around Dix Park, and sometimes our development community is not really quite understood as a powerful asset for the park. This is a little slideshow. The next slide, please. That talks about how we make all this area, not just the project under consideration today, but the whole area of the edge study, and particularly along Lake Wheeler Road, part of the park itself. I don't think any of us today fully understand what a park, what a road next to a park should be like, or what it can be like. And that question needs to be addressed as we indicate to developers what kind of things would excite our attention. Next slide, please. Speaks for itself. I'm really not saying anything that everybody on this commission knows already. And I had a wonderful experience with Sarah Ellis and Hannah to smarten me up. But I did want to put my 2 cents worth in, next slide please, around these concepts that the slides show. Now, Lake Wheeler Road isn't going to be Fifth Avenue or what's that, Central Park West, but I think those streets give a real good idea of what we should be aiming for. And I'm a big believer in high density, high buildings along Lake Wheeler Road for the following reason, and I'd love to be challenged on this. Central Park, Fifth Avenue, I'm sorry, and Central Park West are 100 feet wide. They have 30-foot sidewalks on either side. Frederick Law Olmsted developed a sort of a loggia along the sides of those two sides of the park. So a person in Sheep Meadow in Central Park looks out at the buildings around it and sees an escarpment. They don't see a crowded building, high-rise thing. They see something that's there, not here, and it works, I think, pretty well. But I'm happy to hear more about how that facade is articulated, and with voids and things that give it even better impact. Next slide, please. Again, you got the main park, you have the immediate frontages, and between those two is some sort of liminal area. That's the other thing I'd like to see more conceptualized in terms of how buildings work in such a space. And then beyond that, you have the zone of what I call park actuated growth. Michael Van Valkenburg says it's the area of the park's psychological immensity. Either way, it's a big area. It gives some promise that value capture in those areas can be successful, and that the area is much more extensive than we might imagine. Someone recently mentioned, it was Adrian Heflick from MVVA, that there's some sort of 13-to-1 ratio in terms of making that value capture work. And I think this concept might enable that. Next slide, please. I'm not going to get into this, but I love the Royal Crescent in Bath, England, because it puts from each end of that building is 1,000 feet. But by making it in a circle, everybody knows their pi, and it turns 1,000 feet of people with visual frontage to the outside into 1,500 feet. And that's just a suggested comment about how you make the conditions work along Lake Wheeler Road. Is there another slide? I looked at this recently. Yeah, okay. Maybe speaks for itself. So let me wrap up by saying the standard set by this current project, mainly for connectivity and frontage articulation. And when I say connectivity, I mean not just connectivity to the park, but connectivity to the properties on beyond it, away from the park, because people who have their property on the front of the park, at their front door, so to speak, are in an area of privilege. And that privilege can be extended by careful development of the streets and byways entering into it. Central Park is 6 miles, 5 miles in diameter. Let's see, 5. It has over 100 streets that feed into the park. Most of them are less than 300 feet apart. Now, the area behind Lake Wheeler Road isn't like the Upper East Side, but it's going to have a proportional effect. So I'm trying to get some way of thinking about how these properties are developed to take advantage of the fact that along Lake Wheeler Road, which is a mile long, there are 5 streets that enter, and something needs to magnify that effect. And that can be done by giving attention to how those streets that feed Lake Wheeler Road operate. In particular, I see Kerfman, which parallels Lake Wheeler Road, as being very important. And on the slide for the study, you saw that Kerfman is shown extending to the area that's being proposed for rezoning. So I encourage in my notes to you, making certain that that is considered as something that's going to happen, because those lateral connections will reinforce the feeding into Lake Wheeler Road connections, and they can be a variety of them. The park has a reciprocal duty to these property owners, and there's no better team than the MVVA and Kate Pierce city staff team. So I think that expression of reciprocal duty is something that both parties, the developer and the city, need to be prepared to operate. The developers are probably, I'm not going to say probably, I'm pretty sure they're ahead of despite the fact that we have a master plan, a little bit ahead of what our city's capacity is to get things underway. So they'll need to have some close cooperation so that the people that are developing along Lake Wheeler Road will have a pretty, as concrete a possible idea as they can possibly get. One of the things to think about is parking. There's a plan for parking at the Plaza and Play area. The parking is something I don't like there. I don't think parking and vehicles who are going to serve the best interests of the park. But I know, although people don't go to a park, the reason they go to a park is not to look at parking. The reason they don't go to a park is they don't see parking, but it doesn't have to be on the park property, which is limited. And I think I heard mention, or maybe I saw a slide that suggests that this particular area could also demonstrate how shared parking used by the park would be good. I sent you some material. I realized I did not send to you what I have been describing as an integrative park neighborhood. It looks like this project is going to be a wonderful demonstration of how that can be expressed. It's a park actuated area. I mean, it's going to be influenced by the park, and its character is going to influence the park's quality. I believe that ultimately every track in that area along Lake Wheeler Road should be a planned development so that those kind of needs and the intricacy of those needs can be met. Also, I believe that on Lake Wheeler Road, height is much less important than articulation, as I tried to illustrate by Central Park West and Fifth Avenue. But of course, that's probably a stretch. My experience in landscaping comes from 3 courses. I get to take a free course at NC State because I'm over 65, and I commend it. There's another asset for Dix Park, the faculty at the College of Design. But I'm pretty sure that we want as active an edge as is possible. So way longer than you all have time for, but I did want to introduce myself because everybody thinks and relates to a person the way they imagine the person to be. So I wanted to leave as little as possible to your imagination, except I don't have a video, which is just as well because my daughter has insisted that I let my hair grow out during the epidemic. And I was a Navy officer for 16 years, and I'm used to a very discreet haircut. So
Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
you haven't gotten a
Thank you,
chance to
sir.
see that. Someday we'll remedy that problem. Thanks again for all your time, everybody.
Thank you, sir. We really appreciate your comments and your presentation. It was wonderful, and a delight to see that from the public. We've got about 15 minutes before we need to adjourn, but I just wanted to see, I know we have some conditions that the applicant stated that we need to add to this case, but in lieu of those conditions that are going to be added, do we have any questions or comments from the commission about what we just saw? Commissioner Haber.
Yeah, I have a handful. I'll try to limit them because I'm sure other folks do too, and I know we're running out of time. I'm going to go back to our retreat a few months ago and this idea about aspirational versus key. And I'm just curious, again, our backup doesn't necessarily identify those. I know I can go look up each one of those policies and understand which ones are aspirational and which are key. But I would like to know about that. I did recognize that there is some adjacencies to some of the current residential units, and I know we've had a lot of discussion about that on other projects. Certainly, this area is changing, needs to be changing. I'm curious about the TOD line, how it cuts this site in half. I'm not sure why further down Lake Wheeler Road would not be part of the TOD. And then again, I still struggle with this one with the future land use map. The fact that everything around it is regional mixed use, which is pretty intense. And then we have that band of residential future land use. And my understanding is inside the R districts, when we remapped in 2013, and Travis and David, tell me I'm wrong, because again, I keep asking this question, I can't get it straight. The R designations were mapped as close as they could be to what was existing. And the other, like i.e. the regional mixed use, were thought forward to a future land use. And so I'm just trying to confirm that in my head, because it does seem, just sitting here looking at IMAPs, and again, when you zoom out and you look at where this property is located, and you look at the inconsistencies, you look at the development patterns, you look at the future land use map, I just have some questions about that. Again, I have a bunch more, but I'll be quiet because I'm sure other folks have questions as well.
Any other comments or questions? Commissioner Raines.
Thanks, Vice Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to second what Commissioner O'Haver mentioned. There seems to be a little bit of a conflict with future land use map and the Southern Gateway study. It seems like what the applicant has provided aligns with more of this Gateway study in many aspects, and not necessarily the future land use map. I guess some questions I have for staff are for the TOD and any sort of improvements along Lake Wheeler Road. Is there any like drafts or ideas for how that area is going to be improved for pedestrian and bike connections? And then what sort of improvements are anticipated for the Hamel Road? Those are my two main questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Raines.
Good afternoon. This is Eric Lamb with the City's Transportation Department. And some of those questions are going to get answered with the Dix Ed study that is being undertaken right now. Right now, the comprehensive plan currently calls for Lake Wheeler Road to provide a 2-lane divided avenue, which would be 1 lane each direction, center median or a center turn lane, bike lanes, and sidewalks. And so obviously the opportunity exists with having a key park here to go above and beyond that. We have been talking with our parks cohort about looking at removing bike lanes from the street and instead moving to a large multi-use facility that will be on the west side that would meander along the park frontage and tie into the greenway to the north. We've not locked down what the sidewalk facilities would look like on the east side of Lake Wheeler Road. There's some sensitivities to the existing housing that is south of this location, which is naturally occurring affordable housing. And so we're not entirely sure what the final footprint of that cross section is going to look like. Hamel is a relatively important street in the network, as that is intended to connect directly across and all the way to Dawson McDowell with a reconfigured intersection of South Saunders and Dawson McDowell. You saw one of the earlier graphics from the Southern Gateway plan that showed that vision. So effectively what you'll be able to do is come, off of the Beltline, for example, off of 40, come up South Saunders Street and make a left on Hamel and take you directly into the park. And it's my understanding as well that the park plan has recently pivoted a little bit to look at realigning one of the park access points in this area to align opposite Hamel. So Hamel obviously is an important intersection. We've had some conversations with the applicant about how to treat that intersection. There's been some conversations about the potential for a roundabout. That gets into a larger conversation about roundabouts and their appropriateness in this corridor. Again, one of those things that we're going to work through more holistically with the Dix Ed study. I would be happy to answer any other questions you have.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett.
Thank you. So I'll be brief because Molly addressed some of my questions and concerns in her presentation. So I talked to Molly and the applicant last week, but when I talked to her, I hadn't seen the staff report yet. So then when I saw the staff report, I sent her some questions and comments that I had. So I really appreciate her trying to address some of that in her presentation today. I know it was on short notice, so I look forward to whatever conditions they may come back with. I'll just hit on what my primary concerns were, and it was the note in the staff report that this could significantly alter the character of and impact the surrounding area, the inconsistencies with specific area guidance in the Southern Gateway Area Plan, the heights next to some of these single-story buildings, light, noise, and traffic impacts. I had a major concern about the inconsistency with policies to preserve the historic character and the theme of growing successful neighborhoods and communities. That seemed pretty important to me. The adaptive reuse of the warehouses, but Molly mentioned that they were looking to preserve the houses. I had some concerns around, I've said this before, removal of naturally occurring affordable housing with what is likely not to be affordable housing coming back into that area. I recognize, as Molly pointed out, that the area is changing. You can already see it's leaning that way towards redevelopment, but I still think there needs to be some sensitivity to trying to bring back something that the people who are ultimately going to be displaced can also enjoy. That's one of my big concerns with this whole development of Dix Park, is that the neighborhoods that are currently ringing the park, that they also get to benefit. They don't just get pushed further out and we bring in all of these other people into the area. So I would love to see some way of marrying the new development that's coming with the development, the people that are there already. And then a big concern is, as Eric was just saying, some of this is going to be addressed in the Dix Edge area study. And I'm concerned about having these rezonings coming ahead of that when we don't know what's coming out of that. How do we ensure that the rezoning is going to be consistent with the recommendations coming from that study? I know at the case that we heard on in our regular planning commission meeting, it said that that was coming in fall 21. And then this staff report said it was coming in 2022. So can we have a condition that this case has to be consistent with whatever recommendations come out of that? I don't know that that's really feasible, but it just seems concerning to me that we're approving rezonings of this significance when there's a big study going on in the area, and the study won't be done ahead of this case being approved, if it's approved. And so I think that that really summarized what my questions and my comments were, and I appreciate the applicant attempting to address them, but I just wanted to have them on the record so you all knew what I had shared with them. And I'm happy to share my email with the commission if you would like me to.
Thank you, Commissioner Bennett. Yes, please share, if you don't have an issue with it, please share that email with the rest of the commission. We'd be delighted to take a look at it. Any other questions or comments? Commissioner Haber.
Yes, I didn't want to, and I was trying to be quick. I know we're at 5:56. Seems like we're not addressing a handful of us have concerns, but I failed to mention Mr. Johnston's comments about the park and his images of Central Park. And I get it, he's taking landscape architecture classes. I am a registered landscape architect. And I think he will agree that, parks' successes are its edges and its programming. I mean, a park success is its edges, and that's what this project is about. And the 30-foot sidewalk, I thought I remembered this, but I went back and looked on Google Earth. The 30-foot sidewalk is park side. If you look around the edges of Central Park, at least on Google Earth, what I did tonight, that's development, that's urban development. And so I understand his comments. I agree with his comments. I think some of that's park side, but I just want to reiterate sort of the point that he was getting at, is that the success of parks, one of the biggest successes of parks is its edges. And that's exactly what this is, notwithstanding all the concerns that I just shared, that Commissioner Bennett shared and Commissioner Rain shared. I just wanted to acknowledge Mr. Johnson's comments.
Thank you, Commissioner Haber. Commissioner Elder.
I just have a quick question about how many of the properties that are being proposed for rezoning here have residential occupants currently?
Is Molly Stewart still on?
Yes, yes, I can. Actually, I would like to turn that over to Gabe Koloff from Atlas Stark. My understanding is that there are 4 currently residentially occupied, but I would like his confirmation on that.
Yeah, there's currently 4 occupied, and the one house at the corner of Hamel Drive and Lake Wheeler. Actually, when Hamel Drive is improved with sidewalk, etc., parallel parking, that one will actually would go away naturally.
Commissioner Elder, does that answer your question?
That does. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? So it looks like we've got some additional conditions pending on this case. So I think what we need to do is defer. I don't think we need to take any motion or make any take any action on this case at this time. Am I correct in stating that, Mr. York?
Actually, I believe what staff has indicated is that either the case needs to leave committee of the whole or need to gain an extension, a time extension to continue discussion in the committee. So you have 2 options, okay. Essentially. One is vote in committee with no recommendation, and then it comes back to your August 10th Planning Commission meeting, and you can continue discussion then. Or request a time extension today and hold it in committee, and then you'll discuss it at your August committee of the whole meeting.
Okay, so with that, I'd like to take a motion to vote this out of committee of the whole with no recommendation, and we'll hear it at our August 10th meeting. I'll make that motion, and Commissioner Haber seconded that motion.
So that's to move it out to the full PC with no recommendation.
Yes. Commissioner.
Can I just provide a thought that I think that this particular case will merit a lot more discussion, and I'd rather leave it out of our regular planning commission meeting, so that way we don't spend that time on this discussion. So I would recommend an extension so that we keep it in committee of the whole, so that we can have these deep dive conversations on it then.
Okay, so what we need to do, we've got a motion and a second, so let's take a vote on that. And if that doesn't pass, then we'll make a motion, your motion, and then we'll need a second and we'll need to vote on that. So the motion on the table now is to take no action and to move it to the August 10th meeting. We have a motion and a second, so all in favor of that, we just need to show of hands. And, okay, all in opposition. So it's 4-4. So do we need to make another motion? Then let's hear your motion, and then we'll vote on that as well. And I'm pretty sure we're gonna get the same results.
I'd like to make a motion to request an extension. Do I need to say how many days?
It would be helpful. So typically it's a 45-day or a 60-day time extension.
Okay, I'll request a 45-day time extension to allow for us to have further discussion on this case in the next committee of the whole.
So we've got, I saw 3 hands that time. Commissioner Lampman, did you mean to raise your hand? No?
I was seconding the motion.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so we've got a motion and a second, so all in favor by show of hands. We've got 4, and those in opposition, show your hands. We've got 3. Commissioner Raines, did you? Oh, okay, so 4. Okay, so that's 4 to 4 as well. So I don't know what to do in that case.
So at this point, you have two failed motions. Neither one of the motions have passed, so you need to have a prevailing motion that gets a majority of your votes.
Okay.
Usually what would happen is it would just remain unacted on, but because we have this time limitation that you have to request additional time, you need to pass one of your votes. You need to pass one of your motions.
Okay. Commissioner O'Haver, I see your hand, and then I'll get to you, Commissioner.
I was in this awkward position of making a motion that went through the same process, which is uncomfortable. But at that time, my understanding was what we did at that point was it moved through without a recommendation. So why is that changing now? Because that's what happened when I made that recommendation, and it failed twice, or both sides failed. So I mean, I'm okay with what procedurally, whatever we need to do. I'm just curious.
I believe in that case, there was a motion to approve or deny that failed. Here, we actually have a motion to refer it out without recommendation that failed. So that could not be the default action. The default action would be that it stays with the committee, but when the committee next meets, you will have passed your deadline. And so you would not be able to act on it.
Technicalities, Mr. York, technicalities.
So basically, if you don't act, council at their first meeting in September, because that's their first meeting after your deadline, could just set the public hearing and move on, or they could actually set it in August at their meeting in August and hold the public hearing in September without your recommendation. I think you want to at least get something out to the committee. I mean, to the full commission.
Commissioner Miller. I'm sorry, Commissioner Bennett, then Commissioner Miller. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I was just going to say, I'm assuming we're operating under that new text change with the expedited Planning Commission review. And as I recall, this was one of the concerns, that cases were going to be rushed. It's happening, it's playing out, that a case that needs more discussion is being rushed out, so we don't have to request a deadline. What we were told was that the cases were going to come to us and they were going to be better cases, so we wouldn't have to have as much discussion. And if this is an example of that, then I would say that's not happening, because a lot of these conditions that we're talking about and things that we want to see under that, I guess, aspirational text change, these things would have happened. And so we would get a case and we wouldn't have the need to do all of this. So I know I'm not really resolving the issue, but I just want to say that this was the concern with reducing our review of these cases. And I think this highlights why we probably needed the 90-day review that we had before.
If I can respond to that, actually, this case is still under the old, what I'll call the old rules. The new procedures will only go into play for cases that are submitted after June 15th to the city. So
okay, thank you for that clarification.
Sure. So the situation is that the case was submitted, it was referred to committee of the whole, and we lost essentially a month in review time getting to the committee of the whole. If I can offer a suggestion here, it seems like y'all are at loggerheads. There's going to be a special committee of the whole meeting on August 5th to deal with a zoning case that's been filed by the state. So you could potentially have this case referred to that committee of the whole meeting. It gets you a little bit closer to additional discussion at a committee meeting. This applicant would not have to wait until the end of August, and that gives you an additional opportunity for review. And then you could also have additional conversation on August 10th. So you have a couple of more opportunities there.
Thank you, Travis. Commissioner Miller, I saw your hand, and I'll get to you, Commissioner O'Haver.
I was going to say, I fully support that idea to move it to that meeting. And it may break loggerheads because I had a hard stop 7 minutes ago and I'm running very late for something, so I had to sign off. So that might break the vote anyway. But I hope that we do meet at the August 5th meeting. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Commissioner Miller. Commissioner Haber.
Yes, I want to support Commissioner Bennett's comments. I mean, I had a question. This is the first time we've heard it, and we're already at a point. I get we get summer break, but we're already like up against the deadline. But to Ms. Bennett's point, I supported the text change to narrow the time, but I think to Ms. Bennett's point, this is shining light on the fact that we need to make sure that we are communicating properly with applicants, that they understand what the differences are and what the expectations are. Because I think her point is spot on. Even though this is an older one, if it were on a newer one, then we're going to find ourselves in the same situation. And I think during our retreat or during the text change conversation, staff acknowledged and identified that there's a lot of work to do and there's some changes that need to happen on that side. So I know we're working on it, but I just want to, I'm scratching my head like, okay, we heard it for the first time. It's complicated. Now we're already asking for an extension. And that is what it is. We've been dealing with a lot of cases like that. I'm not being critical, but to fast forward to Ms. Bennett's point, we could find ourselves in this situation if we're not communicating properly and information. I know that's a heavy lift for staff, and y'all that identify that, you know it. So I'm not, again, being critical, just making a point.
Commissioner Littman.
Can I ask a technical question? If this goes to the committee of the whole on the August 5th meeting, and let's say there are additional conditions that will be applied, does that create a turn time issue of adding those conditions to the new request so that it can get into regular committee or the regular commission?
So if I understand your question correctly, I believe the applicant will be able to submit new conditions before your next committee of the whole meeting. I think your question, however, is what happens after August 5th if the applicant wanted to offer new conditions? And they would still be bound by the 10-day rule at that point.
So then you're saying that if there were additional changes at the committee of the whole, that would we satisfy the 10-day rule until it hit the next planning commission?
Yes, but I think the issue is that the time, and I'm going by memory, so I would ask the case planner to correct me if I'm wrong. The time runs out before your second August planning commission meeting.
Okay, because what I was hoping for is that we could vote to defer it to the next committee of the whole, which would be August 5th. Then at that point, we could vote it out and it would go to the regular planning commission and we would be within the time frame.
I think that's entirely possible. What the time sensitivity here is causing a couple of issues. And the committee of the whole meeting on August 5th just does not provide an additional opportunity for more conditions after that point without time extension. So you could conceivably hear the case on August 5th at the committee of the whole with some new conditions, and then make a recommendation at that point and then send it to the planning commission on August 10th. There's no problem. I think the problem, a potential problem could arise if there's a desire for more conditions after August 5th. At that point, I think the planning commission would be faced with asking for a time extension.
Commissioner Littman.
If I may make a motion, I'd like to make a motion to defer this case to the August 5th committee of the whole.
We have a motion to defer. I see a few seconds. Commissioner Bennett, I saw your hand go up first.
Second.
Okay, so we have a motion by Commissioner Lampman to defer to August 5th and second by Commissioner Bennett. All in favor by show of hands. And those in opposition.
I just want to say, and I wanted to ask the question, and I'm glad this is passing because I know there's a lot going on, but if we have a meeting on August 5th and then we're putting it out to the full PC on the 10th, if there's any request for additional conditions, then that's going to just delay further. How are we going to get, did I miss how we're going to get conditions? We didn't talk about conditions today. We just talked about our concerns. There were a handful of us that said what our concerns were, but we didn't ask for anything specific. We're deferring to the 5th. But we haven't told the applicant exactly what we're looking for or made any kind of recommendation. So we're going to show up on the 5th, and then we're going to turn around and push it out to the 10th. And if there are any additional conditions, that they're not, those conditions are going to have to be deferred. So I don't understand the timing on that.
What I think the applicant said in their presentation that they had conditions they wanted to submit. So they're already looking to revise their zoning conditions anyway. And so if you meet on the 5th, gives you an opportunity to review those. They've heard your comments. They can take attempts, reach out to you individually and work on conditions to add to those to submit in time for them to be acted on by August 5th. But it's the same thing. If you had referred it out to the 10th and there were issues that you wanted to address and change and wanted them to change conditions, you'd be in the same position, but it wouldn't have taken up as much time of the planning commission meeting. What you can do now is hear the conditions on the 5th if they submit them timely. If they're satisfactory, you can make your recommendation, and then the committee report on the 10th could be acted on. If they're not satisfactory and you want to change them, you then could make a motion to refer it to the planning commission to request additional time from council to review it, and you'd have a specific purpose for it. Referring it to the 5th gives you one more bite at the apple before you have to pull the trigger on a request for additional time.
Fair enough. And in the essence of time, I'll still, because it's going to pass, but I don't want to have to go through another motion. So I'll just keep my vote as is, but fair enough. And thank you for that, Mr. York.
Thanks, Commissioner Haver. So we've got a motion that passed 7-1 to defer to August the 5th. Do we have any other comments or announcements to make from the committee members before we adjourn? Commissioner Lampman.
I just wanted a friendly to the applicant. I will make myself available for comments and questions between now and August 5th.
Thank you, Commissioner Lampman. That concludes today's Committee of the Whole meeting. Look forward to seeing you guys in August. Thank you, and everybody be safe. Have a good evening.